Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. So there's nothing to me that's more iconic in the 80s when I was younger and learning about guns and when I first started seeing movies and it was everywhere. It's the HK series of rifles. Now when I say HK, I mean like the HK-G3 or HK-91 or the HK-94 or the MP5 or the HK-33. These are particular rifles are roller delayed. They are cloned a lot in the United States nowadays. However, the clones in the United States are made off of original HK tooling. So they're as close as you can get to an HK without being an HK. Having shot HK rifles, real steel HK rifles, versus my PTR, they're indistinguishable. I have looked at them, I've cleaned them, I've took them apart, I've messed with them. This is next to the AK or the Mauser rifle. This is probably the rifle I probably know the most about. This style of rifle. Why do I like it? It's robust. What's the story behind it? So I've mentioned this rifle many times throughout the series of podcasts I've done. But why is it so iconic to me is probably everyone has seen it in Die Hard, the HK slap, where when you cock the gun, you have to pull it to the rear, and there's a notch where you engage the handle when you change the magazine. Now this is done so you can relieve the pressure on the bolt carrier group inside the receiver. It isn't necessary. However, it makes it function better the first round. Now, here's why I'm saying this. What you're supposed to do with these rifles to cock it is after it's back like that, you've changed it, put the new magazine in, that is, you are supposed to actually slap that handle down and it rockets forward and slams the bolt carrier group forward. Now, why is that slap necessary? And HK tells you to do this is because it forces the locking bearings to come out and the locking piece to be fully engaged so that the gun doesn't misfire or have a catastrophic failure. Okay? And it usually doesn't result in a catastrophic failure unless the gun is dramatically out of headspace. Now, here's one of the cool things about this rifle is you can maintain it yourself. Just like an AR-15, just like a Kalashnikov, you can maintain this up to and including the head spacing of the gun. You do it with changing out either the locking piece or you change out the bearings depending upon where. So there's some measurements you use for this, and that's what you would do. Never fails. I start recording and someone needs me right away. My son's birthday is tomorrow. But the other reasons why this gun is so iconic to me is it reflects manufacturing from the Germans at the end of World War II. A lot of the basic principles of the G3 or the HK series roller delayed locking systems are derivatives that were designed in World War II, specifically the MG42. So the MG42, there was a guy that worked on that project called Vormir Grimler. He ended up working for SETME. Now I've talked about that also. But what's cool about this is this later became transferred into Rheinmetall. Rheinmetall is HK. HK bought the design for this gun. The story behind this, though, is there are three cultures that have perfected stampings, metal stampings. So, the United States, we've been able to do it for years with cars specifically, but we've used that same technology and our same metallurgy that we've learned to use in other industries in firearms. So if you look at like World War II, right at the midpoint of the war for us, we were turning out the M2 grease gun in mass, and it was a pressed, or it was a stamped gun. That's what made it so efficient and so cheap to make. So the Germans, at the end of the war, are one of the other cultures that got this right. Okay, the Germans got it right toward like 1944, 1945 is when they got it. They started endeavoring to do it in 1943. Now what this is, if you don't understand what stamping is you take a metal flat piece of metal that is a set thickness, maybe 2 to 3 millimeters, in the case of like, well, maybe like 1.5 millimeters. In the case of like the HK rifles in the United States, ours was about that same with the M2 grease gun. You go to the Russians are the next ones that were really good at stamping. Look at the Pepesha rifle. Look at how it was designed and how it was manufactured. Look at the PPSH 43. Later on it took them years to do it, but the Kalashnikov, the AK-47, or the AKM to be specifically. When the AKM started rolling out, the M stood for modified, which meant that it actually had started being built in stamped receivers. Now, they had tried doing that, the Russians had, at the beginning of the manufacturing process of the AK, and they just didn't have the technology to make it work right. So they didn't get to do that until like 1970, 60s, 70s. So in 1974, they improved their stampings even more, and they produced the AK-74 and the AK-74M. But I digress and get back to what I was talking about, the HK rifles. So what this revolutionized and why it's so iconic to me is the look. Now, if you've seen an HK G3 or you've seen an MP5, you know that they're in the same family and they're made from the same manufacturer. Just the looks alone, where the stock is, a lot of the parts, believe it or not, are interchangeable. Stocks can be interchanged with some modification. Grips can be interchanged. Foregrips to some extent. Depends on the length of your barrel, because the barrel band on this rifle is actually what holds that, or pistol, in the case of the MP5 machine pistol, holds that front grip on. It actually is just a wedge in the back where it meets the receiver. It wedges in tight there. It hinges up, kind of pivots up, not hinged, pivots up, and then there's a cross pin that goes through right where the front sight is. There's a band that hooks the cocking piece, or cocking tube, and around the barrel and the cocking tube. That band holds the front sight, and that is where there's a pin hold through it that you push to hold the hand grip on. So the gun is really modular also, if not heavy. Now there's a downside for the MP5 and these and the G3 rifles. Any of these HK roller delay systems is they have to have a certain mass in the bolt carrier group, because it's all based off of pressure and when the system locks and unlocks. So what happens is, if the that weight is off, it'll lock or unlock too quickly or too slowly, and it'll cause issues with the gun cycling or blowing up. So that's not a good plan. The HK-G3 rifles, when they were developed as an answer, and I've said this in another podcast, so I apologize if I'm repeating. I just think this one really is iconic and needs to be brought back up. And it's more so because it's one of my favorite rifles. But think about in the time frame when it was adopted in the 60s is when it finally got adopted by the Germans. The Germans still, the Europeans in general, and I've said this, they didn't want the Germans to have the FNFAL. So they went ahead and said, no, you can't have the FNFAL even though you're a NATO member. So the Germans had to seek an alternative. That's where they found the SETME and the SETME C3. So they brought it over, finished up design. This gun still is one of the most produced guns. I keep saying that, but it really is. Somewhere to the tune of 2 to 3 million of these units exist in the world right now, and it is right in line with the FNFAL. Iran still uses it. Guyana still uses it. Saudi Arabia still uses it. Sweden still uses it. Turkey still uses it. Turkey's made new and upgraded versions up until they've just changed to a piston-driven AR-10, like a 416 derivative type rifle. It was used in Britain as a DMR rifle. Of course, Germany, Dutch, the Netherlands, that is. Canada probably used it as DMR because they were kind of linked with the Brits. Ireland used it. South Africa used it. Egypt. It's very popular around the world because it's had a licensed copy handed out. I think Peru used it for a while. There's been a lot of companies, or not a lot of companies, a lot of countries, and probably a lot of companies that use HK designs, and they either licensed them or bought them outright from HK. It is one of the most successful rifles around. And for its day, it was state of the art. One of the weird things about it is that bolt carrier group mass, that weight of it, doesn't lend to a hold open for last round. And the magazines aren't designed for it either, just like the Kalashnikov. This seems to be like a European design thing, because the Kalashnikov doesn't have it. There's other rifles that I've heard about in the European space. They don't stay open on the last round. It's strictly kind of a Western thing for a while. Now it's taking off in the rest of the world. Why we like it is when the gun runs dry, you know to kick the magazine out, and you're already ready to go. And it'll, when you drop the bolt carrier group forward, you're ready to engage back into either hunting, shooting, or the firefight that you're in. So it's advantageous, where the Europeans were thinking that this would keep crap from getting into the action. But the other thing the Germans did with the HK is they made it as accurate as they possibly could. So this, for its day, was shooting at a 3 MOA group, okay, at 100 meters. Now understand that this is from like World War II standards, where if you could hit like 6 MOA at 100 meters, okay, that was good enough. Okay, now they've gotten it down to where it needs to be pretty tight. They made a sniper